The scent of grease, gasoline, and worn rubber lingered inside the small repair shop tucked away on Maple Street. It wasn't glamorous, but to Ethan, it was survival. The garage was dimly lit, its tin roof rattling whenever the wind pushed through. The cracked walls bore stains from years of hard work, and the flickering fluorescent light buzzed as if threatening to die at any moment. Ethan tightened the last bolt under the hood of an old pickup, his hands stained with oil. Sweat trickled down his temple, and he wiped it away with the back of his arm, leaving a dark streak across his tired face. In the corner, his daughter Lily sat on a stool with her legs swinging back and forth. At only 6 years old, she had already learned how to wait patiently while her father worked late. She had a worn-out notebook in her lap, crayons scattered around her like tiny jewels, and she was humming softly as she colored. "Daddy," Lily called, holding up her drawing of a house with a red roof and flowers along the path. "Do you think one day we can have a house like this?" Ethan paused, his chest tightening. He forced a smile, walked over, and kissed the top of her head. "One day, sweetheart, I promise." He didn't add that most days he wasn't even sure they'd have enough for rent, let alone a house with flowers. Since Lily's mother had left them, every breath, every move Ethan made was to keep his little girl safe and fed. College had been left behind, his dreams of becoming an engineer sacrificed for diapers, milk, and endless bills. The sound of an engine broke his thoughts. A sleek black Mercedes rolled into the garage, its glossy paint reflecting the dim lights. The car didn't belong here among dented pickup trucks and rusted sedans. Ethan frowned, wiping his hands on a rag as the door opened. Out stepped a man who looked like he had walked out of a glossy magazine, tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. His shoes gleamed even in the dust, his watch caught the light, and his presence filled the space with authority. Ethan's breath caught when he recognized him. Alexander Pierce. Everyone in the city knew his name, the CEO of Pierce Enterprises, a man whose company dominated headlines, whose face often graced newspapers and financial magazines. People spoke of him with a mix of admiration and fear, a man who had everything: money, power, influence. "What's a man like that doing here?" Ethan muttered under his breath. Alexander's deep voice cut through the silence. "My driver's off duty today, and this thing refuses to start." He gestured at the Mercedes with a flick of his hand, as if annoyed the machine had dared defy him. "Can you fix it?" Ethan nodded stiffly. "I'll take a look." As he lifted the hood, he felt Alexander's eyes on him, sharp and calculating. Lily, curious, hopped off her stool and inched closer. Her wide brown eyes studied the stranger who seemed so out of place in their small world. "Is she your daughter?" Alexander asked casually, though his gaze softened slightly as he looked at the little girl. "Yes," Ethan answered, not looking up. Lily grinned, her missing front tooth showing. "My daddy can fix anything." For a brief second, Alexander's expression shifted. Something almost like amusement tugged at his lips, but his eyes remained unreadable. He watched Ethan's steady movements, the way his strong hands worked with precision and skill. Within 10 minutes, Ethan closed the hood and stepped back. "It's done." Alexander arched a brow. "That fast?" "Loose battery connector," Ethan explained. "Sometimes problems look bigger than they really are." That line made Alexander pause. His eyes narrowed slightly as if the words had struck deeper than they should have. "Impressive," Alexander murmured, almost to himself. Ethan handed him the ragged invoice pad. "You can settle up inside." But Alexander didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't move toward the office. Instead, he studied Ethan, his gaze lingering as though weighing something unseen. "You know," Alexander began slowly, "men with your skill shouldn't waste their lives in rundown garages like this." Ethan stiffened, jaw tightening. He had heard this before, though never from a man like Alexander. The world loved to remind him of what he could have been if life hadn't broken him. He gave a humorless chuckle. Not everyone gets to choose the life they live. Alexander tilted his head, intrigued by the quiet defiance in Ethan's tone. "What if I gave you a chance to prove yourself?" Ethan's hands froze. He turned sharply, staring at the CEO as if he had just spoken another language. "What? I meant what I said," Alexander replied. "Talent like yours shouldn't rot here. You fixed in minutes what most would waste hours on. A man like you could do much more." Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. His chest burned with a familiar ache, the sting of hope trying to push through the armor of disappointment. He had learned not to believe in miracles. Too many people had mocked him, abandoned him, written him off as a failure. "Please," Ethan muttered, his voice rough. "Don't joke with me." The words hung in the air, thick with pain. Lily looked up at her father, confused by the sharpness in his tone. Alexander's expression hardened, but his voice dropped to something dangerously sincere. "Do I look like a man who jokes?" Their eyes locked. Ethan saw nothing playful there, only a fierce intensity that unsettled him. For reasons he couldn't understand, this powerful man, who had everything, was looking at him as if he mattered. The rain outside began to fall harder, drumming against the tin roof. Inside the garage, time seemed to still. Ethan stood frozen, caught between disbelief and the faint flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, possibility. For the first time, he wondered if fate had just walked into his broken-down world wearing a tailored suit. The days following Alexander Pierce's unexpected visit were a blur for Ethan. He tried to convince himself it had been nothing, just a fleeting encounter, a powerful man amused by a struggling mechanic. Yet the memory of Alexander's eyes, sharp and unyielding, haunted him. Ethan wanted to forget, but Alexander wouldn't let him. On the third morning, as Ethan prepared to open the garage, a luxury car once again pulled up to the curb. Ethan froze, rag in hand, as Alexander stepped out, not in a business suit this time but in a casual jacket that somehow looked even more expensive. "Good morning," Alexander said, as if he did this every day. In his hand, he carried 2 cups of coffee and a small paper bag. He held one out. "Black, no sugar. That's what you drink, isn't it?" Ethan stared at him, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "How do you know that?" Alexander smirked. "I pay attention." Inside the bag were new crayons and a sketchbook for Lily, who squealed with delight when she saw them. Ethan's chest tightened. No one had ever done such a small, thoughtful thing for his daughter. "You didn't have to," Ethan began. "I know," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "But I wanted to." That was how it began. Alexander kept coming back, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing at all but a willingness to sit in the garage and watch Ethan work. It wasn't long before gossip spread like wildfire. The neighbors whispered behind Ethan's back. Customers smirked as they watched Alexander's sleek car parked outside the shabby garage. Other mechanics at nearby shops mocked him cruelly. "Guess you've got yourself a sugar daddy now," one sneered. "Better practice polishing more than just cars." Even Ethan's landlord, who had been threatening eviction, laughed when he spotted Alexander leaving one evening. "So that's your plan, huh? Climbing the ladder by catching a rich man's eye." Ethan burned with shame. He had worked his hands raw for years to give Lily a decent life, and now people reduced him to nothing but a joke. But Alexander never flinched. If anything, the ridicule seemed to fuel him. He started inviting Ethan to dinner. Real dinners, not fast food eaten on the hood of a car. Fancy restaurants where waiters in crisp uniforms served dishes Ethan couldn't pronounce. At first, Ethan refused. "I don't belong in places like that," he muttered. Alexander's reply was simple. "You belong wherever I say you belong. And I say you belong with me." The words made Ethan's pulse quicken in ways he didn't want to admit. One evening, after closing the garage, Ethan found Alexander waiting outside in the rain. His umbrella shielded him perfectly, not a drop daring to touch his immaculate coat. Ethan almost walked past him. "Why do you keep doing this?" Ethan demanded. "You're a CEO. You could be anywhere, with anyone. Why waste your time on me?" Alexander stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. "Because you're not a waste. You're real. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Ethan shook his head. "You don't know what you're asking. My life is messy. People already laugh at me. And you'll get tired of this. Of me. And then I'll be the fool who believed." "Stop." Alexander's voice cut through the rain. "I don't pursue people for amusement. When I want something, I go after it until I have it. And I want you, Ethan. I want you and Lily in my life." Ethan's breath caught. The sincerity in Alexander's tone was undeniable, and it terrified him. Lily, peeking from behind the curtain inside the garage, chose that moment to push open the door. She ran out, her little rain boots splashing in puddles, and looked up at Alexander. "Mr. Pierce," she said shyly, "are you really Daddy's friend?" Alexander crouched down to her level, the powerful CEO suddenly softened. "More than that, Lily. I want to be someone who makes sure you and your daddy never have to worry again." Her innocent eyes widened, and she whispered the words that made Ethan's chest ache. "I like you. You make Daddy smile." Ethan closed his eyes, the dam inside him threatening to break. It had been so long since anyone had looked at him without judgment. So long since anyone had made him feel seen. But hope was a dangerous thing. The next week, Ethan reluctantly agreed to visit Alexander's office. Walking into the towering glass building of Pierce Enterprises, Ethan felt like an intruder. Polished floors reflected the shine of expensive shoes, assistants hurried with tablets in hand, and every eye turned as the CEO entered with a mechanic by his side. "Who's that?" someone whispered. "Is he with him?" Another gasped. Ethan's ears burned, but Alexander walked proudly, shoulders squared, as though daring anyone to question him. He introduced Ethan not as a project, not as charity, but as the man who fixed what no one else could. Later, in the privacy of his office, Alexander made his offer again. Head of maintenance, full benefits, a salary that'll change your life. No tricks, no strings, just a chance to use your skill where it matters. Ethan's hands shook as he looked at the contract. It was everything he had dreamed of, a stable future for Lily, security, dignity. But fear gnawed at him. Was it real, or just another cruel joke life had prepared? He whispered, almost to himself, "Please, please don't joke with me." Alexander reached across the desk, placing his hand firmly over Ethan's. "I don't joke, Ethan. Not about this. Not about you." For the first time, Ethan let himself believe. The rain outside the office windows tapped softly against the glass, a steady rhythm, as if the world itself was waiting for his answer. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the fragile spark of hope flicker to life.